Hello, this is James Stone, and I just wanted to demonstrate for some people how to get started with grids. So Foundation, Bootstrap, they all use this concept of the grid, but sometimes it can be confusing, especially if you haven't done a lot of work with grid-based systems, such as the Grid 960, and especially if you haven't used a lot of responsive design. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how I start a Foundation 5 project and how I quickly kind of develop a grid, and maybe you'll see some things that make it a little bit simpler to understand than in the official documentation. So first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and start a new Foundation project. I'm using the new Foundation 5, so I'm just going to call this project grid test. Okay, so first thing we need to do is to start compass. I'm just going to start compass with watch, and that's why we don't have the style sheets here. And there we go. We're started with Foundation with kind of the basic setup, and let's get started. So here we go. First thing I want to do, I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of everything that doesn't really add anything, just all this kind of boilerplate code. Okay, so now we're starting with nothing. So there's a couple different approaches to how you approach the grid with Foundation. The older style, if you're coming from maybe Foundation 3, and they integrated a mobile first into Foundation 4, is to start with the desktop grid. And I think that's a really common way of thinking about a website, so I'm going to demonstrate that first. So starting with the desktop grid and then adjusting, right, for mobile. So I use a plugin called Emmet on Sublime Text. It's available for a lot of different things. It allows me to very quickly develop the scaffolding and the grids for Foundation. So the first thing, let's just create like maybe a header across the top that's in a panel, just so we can kind of see the simplest part of the grid. So I'm just going to do a dot row and a large 12 columns. And then within that, I'm going to do a panel and a H2. Okay, and we'll just call this the header. All right, so there we go. And so I think it can get a little confusing when you look at the documentation because you have all these different options and you're dealing with a 12 column grid system. And so I think the way to think about it is how can it be divided up? So often if you're doing a design, use a lot of different things. So let's just talk about some different ways to approach it. So let's talk about a 3-column approach, right? So we'll do 3 columns of text underneath. So I'm going to do dot row, dot large. And so if we're doing 3 columns, if you divide 12 by 3, it gives us 4. So we want each column to be 4 of our grid elements wide. And I am just going to put some lorem text, a paragraph, and then some lorem text. We'll just say 15 words. And I'm going to add 3 of these just so we can start to get an idea of how this breaks down. Okay. I just had been zoomed in a little bit too bit and it was triggering the mobile media query. Okay, and here we go. Okay, so we have our 3 columns. And, one thing you can do if you want to kind of accentuate it is you can always add a panel. And that'll just make it a little bit more obvious where those columns are. It adds a little bit more spacing in. So let's take the same approach and let's build up some other common ways of working with the grid. Okay, so we have our 3-column approach. And so if we want to do a 4-column approach, so if we take 12 divided by 4, it leaves us 3. So we went 3 grid elements wide, and we're going to do 4 elements. And so it should be right below. And so we have like a 3-column and then a 4-column right below. And so, these are just some common ways in which you can use the grid that's very simple, right? And so what about like a 2/3 split? This is a pretty common thing. Everyone loves the golden ratio, and it typically looks pretty nice. So let's build that out. So I'm going to do a row and then a large 8 columns. And let's just add a panel just so we can see. Paragraph and some warm text. 15 characters. Okay, so that's just the first part of it. And this will be a little bit different in Emmet, because I will need to build things out. So often when I'm using Emmet and I want to start to do something a little bit more complicated, I'll kind of start breaking things out individually like this. Okay, and so we'll do a large 4. Okay. And what's interesting about this, it's very easy if we want to reverse the order of these. And there we go. We have a 2/3 split, 2/3 split. And so this is interesting, and you can resize the browser, obviously, right? And we get this nice stacking effect, and a lot of responsive frameworks do this, but this isn't really the beauty of Foundation. So let's jump back in and do something a little bit more complicated from the desktop. Okay. So I'm going to keep the same header, but let's create like a 2/3 split. I'm going to do the larger part on the left, so I'm going to do large 8 columns here, and I'm going to create a sidebar that is going to be large 4 columns. And of course you can't see this, right, because you need a panel. So let's make the sidebar a panel. And let's create some sort of typical sidebar we might see. So maybe I'll do a H3 and we'll call it the sidebar. And then let's create some sort of grouping. So we're gonna have like an H5, and that's gonna be something with maybe 2 words, or let's say 1 word, okay? And then after this, we're going to have a UL, LI, and then an A, and let's do a lorem 3, okay? So this is just how I'm building out very quickly. And so what's really nice, again, about Emmet is I can separate this out. So let's say I want the UL. And here, what I can do is say I want 5 of these, right? And we'll do it on the LI, so it does everything. Okay. We get 5 different things. Okay, perfect. And so sometimes you can do this in Emmet, and I could continue to get more granular, but I tend to just duplicate. So here we go, duplicate, duplicate, duplicate. Okay, and here we go. We have a sidebar with a bunch of information. So let's go and create something a little bit more complex in the first column and let's see what kind of things we might do. Okay. So one really great thing about Foundation is you can nest grids and add more and more elements. So let's use something standard you might see. So let's do maybe a list of images with headlines and this type of thing. So might do something like this. We're going to create our row, and then maybe we'll do a large four columns. Okay, and then we're going to do the same kind of 2/3 split, the opposite direction. So large 8 columns. Okay. And here we might start to put our text. So let's just use an H5 and we'll use lorem with 5 words. Okay. And then underneath that, so I'm going to go up one level. Let's just do a paragraph with 15 lorem. Okay, and I'm just hitting tab and undo so I can kind of see what it looks like. And then maybe after that paragraph, I will create another paragraph, but put inside of it an anchor text that's going to be a button, radius, and lorem. Let's not do lorem. Let's just say it says readme. Okay, so this becomes a problem, right, in Emmet, so it's an easy solution for it, which is like this. Okay, and so that works pretty good, and we also want to have an image. And I really like using this website, lorempixel.com, and you can select a variety of different options. I think cats is one of them. And let's say we want a square image, so 400 by 400. And what's nice about this too is you can do /1. It gives you a specific cat, and /2, it gives you another specific cat. So it makes it really quickly to kind of create these high fidelity prototypes without a lot of work. Okay, so I'm just going to add this to my image. Don't really need to do too much else. And there we go, here's my cat. And let's go ahead and expand this. Okay, so what's interesting, now we could start to build this out a little bit more specifically and even use Emmet to create a bunch of radically different changes. So what I usually might do is create like the basis of what I want, start undoing it, and so and kind of reverse engineer what I want. So what we're going to want here is a dot row, and then within that we have a large 4 columns. And then I'm going to have within this an image, and the image source equals this. Okay. So yes, that's in fact giving what I would like. And then we need to go up a couple levels. So up the image and then up the div, and then I can go and take this. But first I might want to add the large 8 columns. And I'm just hitting tab to see if everything's expanding the way I expect it to. It looks like it is. And then I can actually paste the rest of what I had. And so if I take this, I should be able to replicate this entire nested system. Right? So if if I hit tab, save, do I get the same thing? Okay, not quite. So let's see what my mistake was here. And it looks like I went up too many levels, so let's go ahead and undo that and just remove one of these. Tab again. We can just do a spot check. Yes, this looks correct. Yes, this looks correct. Everything is in the right spot. Okay. And there we go. Now we have our cat, but notice it's a random cat, right? So we want to make some modifications here. So the first thing is, let's make a whole bunch of these. So like what happens if I want like 3, if I do times 3 on the row, it should give me 3 complete sets of this, right? And, but we want that cat to be different. So it's really easy. There's a placeholder here, $, and so when I do this, you'll notice that I get a 1, 2, and 3. So it's very useful, right? Also, notice when I use Emmet to build this out, you also get this really great specific lorem text. There we go. And here's our specific cats. So one thing I do with images, notice how they're all resting up against each other, and that's maybe not the best look. And what I usually do is I just put them inside a paragraph. So here, if I use a paragraph first and just go up one more level to get rid of the paragraph, let's see how that looks. There we go. So we now get this really nice spacing here. So this is all fine and well, and you can see this is still a pretty simple layout, and you could get much, much more complicated with this, obviously. But let's take a look at what happens when we compress it to mobile. So, okay, it works, but it's maybe not ideal, right? The way that everything is compressing. So let's look at how we can add the small grid to kind of clean this up. Okay. And so I have all this built out. I don't really need to use Emmet anymore. So what I might do in Sublime Text is get at this large 4, because I know that these are what I'm going to want to change, at least the first 3. Oops. Okay, and let's just start adding some things to it. So let's say we want a small grid to kind of create the same effect here. So let's do, let's see what it looks like. Small 4, and let's get at these large 8 columns as well. And we'll do a small 8. Okay. All right, so not too bad. Maybe this is looking a little bit better than what you might want to have before, right? Where we had the images spread all the way across and just stacking. And then we have our sidebar down here, which is probably fine because maybe it's not the most important information. Okay, and here we go back to desktop. And this is mimicking the same type of feature. But let's say we want to change how this is displayed, right? So one thing we could do is on our large 8 columns, small 8, let's change that to small 12 so the text goes all the way across. And we could do this. So this is having the effect of just kind of compressing that image and allowing it to expand, right, for desktop. So you get a much larger image. There we go. So let's see if we can take this a little bit further. So one thing you might be thinking about, okay, we've taken care of mobile, we've taken care of desktop, things are looking pretty good. But what about tablet, right? So if you're using Foundation 5 and if you've used Foundation 4.3 with the Foundation 5 medium grid, one thing that's nice is there's this medium grid for tablets that's been added. So the way this works by default sometimes isn't necessarily exactly what you'd want. So you'll see as I go to tablet, which is about here, I'm actually getting the mobile layout. And obviously it just continues to get smaller. So let's see if we can make this tablet user interface a little bit better, because obviously this is not going to look great on a tablet, this huge picture of a cat and just one thing. So let me jump back into the code. Okay. So just like we have our small and large, I think one way to think about the medium grid and how it's implemented is the default behavior with mobile how you want it. So in this case, it's not. And so if it's not, then you're going to want to modify it. And so you have a couple of choices. And I think the first choice is the desktop experience similar to what you want on the tablet? And so in this case, I would argue, let's at least try it and see what happens. Okay, and so all I'm going to do is mimic our large grid by adding a medium 8. And here we have a large 4. I'm going to add a medium 4. Okay, let's take a look at how that looks. All right, so we're not completely done here. So this is looking good, but one thing I forgot to do was to take care of our outer grid. Right, so we have this large 12 columns, we have this large 8 columns. So what it does by default, you can just assume that it's like this. Every time you have a large whatever, just imagine there's kind of this imaginary small 12. And so when it gets to the smaller grid, and in this case, it's also going to encompass the tablet grid, it's going to stretch it all the way across. So we want to leave that the same for small, and I'm not going to overwrite it. We can just assume that it's there, right? And I'm going to add a medium 8, right? And we're going to look for our sidebar farther down here, large 4, and I'm going to add a medium 4 as well. There we go. Now, then it becomes a question of, well, does this really work better on the tablet, or is there a better way to do it? So I'm not saying that this is the perfect thing, but let's say, for example, we want to make our sidebar a little bit wider for tablets and kind of compress those images even farther. So let's just go ahead and make a small change. So let's try doing a medium 6, and we'll just do like a 50% split, and we'll change this medium 8 to a medium 6 as well. There we go. So I'm not saying that this is the perfect example of how you want to do it on tablet, but I just want to show that we can have kind of 3 separate states. And so in this case, we have our full desktop, and this is where we started, right? By creating the sidebar 2/3 split and another nested 2/3 split that runs the opposite way, right? Here with our 4 and then our 8 columns. And then we went to mobile, where we changed to this smaller image stacked on top of the text. And then for our tablet, we created this 50% split, which maybe takes a little bit better, uses the real estate that's available a little bit better. Most tablets are 768 wide, but you have to remember too, unless you're looking at it specifically, it could be used in portrait mode. In portrait mode, it's going to look a lot more like this, which actually this is going to be a much better interface, I think, for portrait mode. So should work good on tablets regardless of the orientation. The only thing is maybe here you have a little bit extra white space, and that is it. This is kind of like a quick introduction to using grids with Foundation, Foundation 5 specifically, but remember this is going to apply to any sort of grid-based framework and responsive framework. So if you're using Foundation, if you're using Bootstrap, it should really work the same. The only thing that's going to be different is the syntax. Okay? Hope this was useful, and have a great day.